Happy Thursday, YouTube. Happy Thursday, everyone. And once again, I'd like to welcome my guests, Koki Pirate.
And I would like to welcome Thursday.
Exactly, and accept Thursday into your heart. And happy Thursday, Luke.
Well, thank you. I'm glad to be back.
Hurrah, and glad to have you back. And, right, basically, another superficially Anglo-centric story, but I think that like all of them, it does actually kind of resonate. In the UK, one of those countries that has what we call the ruling classes. In the UK, that means Eton, Harrow, Rugby. If you went to one of these, the poshest, same-sex boarding schools, from this kind of millionaire background, old family, old money, yada 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 yada, you're fast-tracked to power. You are bred and raised with this in mind. You would just, David Cameron would have grown up expecting to one day be a top politician, maybe Prime Minister. Boris Johnson would have grown up expecting to hold some position like Mayor of London. Now, other than the fact that this is blatant elitism, what Nick Duffel, a therapist and author, is arguing in The Guardian, and he is someone who went to one of those posh boarding schools himself, is that these are the worst people to run a country. In his psychological opinion, when you are just, you're raised by your parents until 7, suddenly you're tossed away to live with a bunch of other boys, in some, again, yes, boys, in some, and you're kind of having to cope, life's thrown, you're suddenly very independent and grown up at the age of 7, but in a sense that actually arrests your development, because you have to have this kind of, to simplify it, article in the description, you have like the veneer of an adult, but there's still a kid kind of driving the machine, and that kid never really goes away. Another factor is abandonment issues by boys more likely to be projected onto the mothers. Another thing is they are raised in a totally male environment, so that by the time, from 7 to 16, by the time they come out of these places, girls and women are alien to them, and they're not in touch with the real world in terms of those kind of progression things. It's actually shown to be a lot rarer for those sorts of prime ministers to promote women or do anything to promote gender equality, because, well, why would you? They probably don't even know that they don't quite see women as quote-unquote normal, because, let's face it, this is a very abnormal way to raise children that the quote-unquote ruling classes still do. So apart from why is Britain still generally ruled, and you can see when you compare with people from from more working class or maybe lower middle class backgrounds who don't do this with their children. Bearing in mind, actually, that's an important point. Statistically, people who went to this type of school make up less than 5% of the population of the country. And they almost invariably get to run it, democratically elected or not. David Cameron actually is even related to the monarchy. I've been told off before for pointing that out, but just to make that sort of point. There's the elitism, but also people who are arguably by their nature psychologically abnormal tend to get in charge, and this tends to have, let's say, a negative effect. Certainly that's the opinion of the psychiatrist or therapist or psychologist or whatever, I don't know the difference, and author of this book and of this Guardian article. And I've babbled on for 5 minutes, so I will hand this over first of all to you, Koki Pirate.
Okay, well, the principle of these sort of boarding schools, I would say a lot of it is the same principle behind monarchy. The idea that we need to get children in their formative years and sort of prepare them for their role, as opposed to it being something that you might get if you work for it. The idea is this is set in stone and you need to prepare for it, which, has its own reasoning to it. Now, in terms of this article, I thought it was really interesting. I felt a little disappointed when, it wasn't like I didn't see any studies being linked because they mentioned a couple of different personality types that one might develop in order to essentially accomplish the same thing, which is, have this sort of dual persona, one to stay out of trouble and another sort of unseen. And, they mentioned like some might take on the role of bullying or some might be like, might even act a little bumbly just to draw people's attention and affection. I'm like, well, how much of this emerges in normal schools? I don't know. Maybe there's a study on it in the book that they expand upon it, but yeah. Um, that being said, I can certainly see the sort of classism that's going on. It's a very niche thing that, you know, whatchamacallit. And granted, I suppose this applies to U.S. politics too. A lot of them come from wealthy backgrounds. Granted, there's some like Clinton. I think he came from a pretty poor background. Nixon as well, I think.
Yes.
So,
yeah.
there are exceptions in U.S. presidents, but you can still see the class divide. And the very way of thinking behind, these boarding schools seems like a relic of sort of the nobility days.
Okay. And, Luke, your thoughts?
Well, I would like to say that there's no institution or practice that you can impose on people that makes them cease to be individuals or humans. That doesn't necessarily mean that specific environments cannot exacerbate certain personality traits, be them positive or negative. It would be very easy to say that this is a privileged group of people that doesn't know what it's like to be an underclassed individual, but you could also make the same of the middle or even lower class. I mean, a low-class individual in the United States probably still has no idea what it's like to be in a third-world country where you literally cannot afford food. So yes, there probably are positives and negatives associated with any form of schooling. And I think that exploring what the positives and negatives are is probably a good thing, but I don't know if we can ever truly get rid of negative influence, especially when people are seeking power in the first place. And that's effectively what we have. We have I'm not familiar with your system, but it sounds like people go to these schools because they want positions of authority in the first place, or at least their parents do. Would that be accurate, Alex?
Yep.
And I don't know how we're going to have an unbiased study on this because there's already a specific subset demographic that's seeking that kind of environment for their children to begin with, and they're probably already consider themselves a privileged batch. So something like I'm sure you could find correlations, but to try to have a causation, it would be very difficult because it's already a very small segment of the population, people that can afford it and people that want that kind of schooling.
Yeah. I also think one of the things I forgot to mention, of course, is that while there's bullying in any schools, the culture of bullying is very much an accepted kind of thing, and traditionally, of course, they had ludicrous things. I don't know if this still happens. Apart from, I think they may still have caning. Traditionally, they would have, but then so would normal state schools back in the 80s. So as recently as the 80s. But an older kid at the school, bearing in mind we're talking kind of like, say you're what you would call a high school age kid, you would get what you would literally call your fag. This is the actual word they used. Your fag was a younger child who was your servant. And that went as far as sitting on the toilet seat to warm it for you before you went to use the toilet. And various other things. And the bullying, sometimes you hear stories that this includes an accepted form of male sexual assault. Well, let's face it, rape. And of the kind, almost like it's a prison or something like that. and damn it, I had another thought a second ago. The actual kind of where you're breeding people who have although they're the poshest people, have in many ways almost like a hideous kind of borstal background, as if they were like born to be young offenders. I was reading something recently about the violence of the royal family, and Prince William apparently, and he will have gone to, it would have been either Eton or Harrow, I forget which, but whichever ridiculously posh boarding school he went to, whenever thwarted, he would threaten people, because this is a boy who knows he's going to be king. And even as a small child, you wait till I'm king, I'll have your head cut off. That's an actual quote from a small boy. So yes, the people bred for power, and also fucking hell, who dares to bully and pick on the heir to the throne? but this happens. So I'll open up the floor for any more comments.
Yeah, I don't even know how to respond to that. That sounds way worse than what I was imagining.
Wow.
Yeah, it's frustrating when there are so many aspects of the ruling class. I suppose I don't know what would be the best way to sort of address this, or even assess properly if this is a real problem, because as Luke pointed out, part of it is that yes, they go to these boarding schools, but another big aspect of it is that they come from a very different background from the general population. You'd have to compare, certain character traits within people from that same class to who went to the boarding school to people in similar socioeconomic standing that did not go to the boarding school. And I see the rationale, the whole abandonment, and the whole sort of personality complexes. It's certainly something that makes sense, but a lot of times, rationalizing something alone isn't reason enough to, I guess, draw these causal lines, or to be sure that's how things go down. So I don't know. I wish I had some more time to look into it, but as far as I see, I don't see any actual surveys or studies comparing, counting all the variables.
Yeah, it's a professional opinion, and it's the voice of experience, but not exactly something provable. So I'll go round then and have final thoughts and goodbye. So Koki, your final thought and goodbye.
My final thoughts are, well, we may want to have people that are prepared from the essential formative years. It's also important to realize that people obtain status through merits, or ideally they would. And so, hopefully, may the hamster of social justice and equality smile upon England and the rest of the world.
Excellent. And Luke, final thoughts and goodbye.
I think this is exactly the opposite of here in America, where people want to vote for the soccer mom. I'm referring to Sarah Palin, because they want somebody in office that's exactly the same as them. So I don't think either system works very well, so I don't know the solution.
A happy medium, perhaps, I suppose.
Yes, that would be good.
Well, I'd say that ideally it's whoever has shown through their history is more fit to lead. I don't think that there's any sort of ideal sort of demographic. I mean, the whole point of democracy is that everyone's on equal standing. It can be poor individuals if they take the time to educate themselves, and, well, not just take the time, if they have the opportunity to educate themselves and lift themselves up, they are fit to lead. Or if it's someone in the middle class or higher class, we want to get everyone,
Ah, indeed. And on that bombshell, it's a good night from me.